Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit Loving host, inviting you back for another bookish conversation with a children's literature author. This week, I'm talking with James Preller. James is the author of the beloved Jigsaw Jones series and a wide range of other books, including novels like The Courage Test, Blood Mountain, and Upstander, along with other series like the Exit 13 series and the Scary Tales series too. He helped us kick off the KidLit Love podcast in episode 3 with a discussion of his first book in the Exit 13 series, The Whispering Pines, and he's here today to discuss one of his newest books, Shaken. We have always had an easy and enjoyable bookish conversation, and I know this one is going to be the same. So let's just jump right in. James, welcome back to KidLit Love. I'm so glad you've returned.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie. Your place has gotten really fancy. I was here for the third one, and we were just sitting on milk crates. You remember there was broken glass on the floor, and now this incredible room you've got. So
That's
thank
right.
you for having me.
We've come a long way.
Yeah.
So I'm excited today because number one, as I mentioned, you've been an early supporter of the podcast. Not only have you come on, but you have convinced some of your really wonderful bookish friends to come on in the beginning too, which have made for some really great conversations. And every book of yours that I have read, I have loved. And the one we're talking about today in just a minute, oh, I gotta say it's my favorite.
Mm.
Hands down, my favorite. I can't wait to get to it. But before we actually start talking about the book, I'd love for you to say a little bit about you and your journey with all of those books. Some listeners may have listened to you in the first episode, but some might not have. So tell us a few things about your journey all the way to today with Shaken that we're going to talk about.
Okay. I'll give you the short version. So, I went to college in Oneonta. I grew up on Long Island, and I went to college in Oneonta. That's when I fell in love with upstate life. I live outside of Albany now. Um, and I began writing poetry and I was an English major and began having that dream of writing. And ultimately, I got a job at Scholastic Publishing in 1985 as a junior copywriter, so working on their book clubs. So I was paid $11,500. And I lived in a apartment with two other guys in Brooklyn, and it was just a great, happy time and an amazing time at Scholastic. But that's really when I started seeing children's books. Um, Part of my job was to write about them and help promote them. So my dream kind of shifted at that time, and my attention and appreciation really of children's books kind of grew from that. And that's my foundation and the books I love and the books that made me. And because I'm the youngest of seven children, I have almost well, I have no memory of my parents ever reading to me. And they were great parents, they're fine, but just wasn't
Yeah.
what we did, And I've met other authors who are like, my mother and I would go to the library on Friday and we'd come home with 10 books, and I wasn't that kid. So I discovered like Where the Wild Things Are and Frog and Toad as, a young adult working in Greenwich Village at the time. So anyway, I published my first book in 1986. I went freelance in 1990, did all kinds of writing. I've made a lot of compromises in order to survive, you know. Then I started writing Jigsaw Jones. So there's 42 Jigsaw Jones books out in the
Me
world.
too.
They're not all in print anymore. That's the thing I've learned about publishing is immortality is a lot shorter than you might have expected. Some books, especially nowadays, you're hearing stories of books, going out of print 3 years after being published. Um, so anyway, I see myself as a survivor, and that's my claim to fame, I think, is that I have hung in there in children's books, and I've done all kinds of, I've written for very young readers and up to YA and just a full range of stuff. And I never got the branding memo. I think if there's anything with my career that's odd or positive or negative, I guess, is that I never got, like, I don't know that there's a James Preller book, and I don't know that I feel I've decided that it's the same way I read. I read widely, I read varied. I feel like I have a lot of interests and I bounce around, and that's how I approach it as a writer too. I just don't stay in my, like, okay,
Yeah.
here's a James Patterson book. It's exactly like this, or um, I kind of bounce around. So I think in some ways that could be a negative in terms of, building an audience or not. I don't know. But in other ways, it's positive because, well, you can only be who you are in this business. So I embrace that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and what I'm doing, I'm just sorry to interrupt you. So then just bringing you up to the present is like I'm still hanging in there. I'm still doing, the pandemic was an issue. There's a lot of obstacles. There always have been. And I've been really fortunate to publish a couple of books today and have this year and have a couple that came out in paperback. So it's been a good year for me.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned the wide range because I really do think it's a positive because with the variety of books that you have, that means you get to meet a variety of readers. And then, a range of kids, a range of people can find you, but then they can follow you. Right? They may find you in Jigsaw Jones, but then, move to The Courage Test and then move to Exit 13 and then move to Shaken. So I
Hmm.
always appreciate when an author kind of grows along with me or along
Hmm.
with the kids. So just a little seed to plant in there that actually I think is a really good thing and really connects, I think, to the book we're talking about today because Kristy figures out that she is not just one thing. That is really okay. And so as you were talking about that, I could see I could see connections to Kristy in the book that we're talking about and that permission to not just be one thing and that actually is really, really great.
Yeah, well, as we've talked in the past, we see a lot of athletes especially can get really focused and really narrow, and the world conspires again. Like if you're a kid and you're a good soccer player, but you're not doing the winter camp,
Yeah.
uh, those coaches are like, where's Katie? Like, what do you mean you're not here? Like they want a 12-month commitment to a sport, and there's a lot that forces, and I think the world can get very narrow for some of these kids and regimented. And that was definitely part of this story
Yeah.
for Kristy. But yeah, I think you're astute to point that out because I think it probably is a core belief in my part too. It's kind of how I want the possibilities
Yeah.
open.
So let's dive into Shaken. I mentioned before we hit record, it's my favorite. I feel like you've just oh, I want readers to I want readers to know that when I open this book and there's a prologue, two-page prologue, and I read that two-page prologue and then I closed it. and I set it down in my lap and I kind of held the book and I literally took a little breath and I was like, oh, I'm going to be in this book. This was such a powerful, emotional, two-page like showstopper for me. I closed it and I thought, okay, I know that James Preller is talking about Kristy and this is going to be something to do with soccer and is her soccer journey going to continue because I'm a good reader and I read all the back flaps and the front flaps and I know it's coming. But when I read that, I closed the book and I went, is he talking about me? I really, really did. I feel like every one of us has, a previous self, a previous version, something that they think about and they wonder about. And whether or not it is sports related, whether or not you're 10, whether or not you're 47, which by the way, I'm not yet, but I'm getting there. Um, I just felt like, okay, every reader is going to feel seen in this prologue. This prologue just knocked me off of my feet. And I wanted you to know that. Such
Mm.
a powerful opening.
Well, thank you. It's really nice to hear that.
Yeah. So why don't you give listeners a little bit of an overview? I'd love to hear in your words what Shaken is about and where the inspiration came from it. I know you talk a little bit about it in the end of the book, but I'd love for
Right.
you to mention that here too.
Yeah, well, very simply, I guess, Shaken is about the idea for Shaken kind of came from the idea of, here is a girl who loves soccer. Soccer is her world. She's totally committed to her sport. And not only that, she is good at it. So what I found is identity becomes a theme that I keep returning to as a writer, as a person, like that who am I moment. And I think that's an Alice in Wonderland scene of like, who am I? I'd have to dig up that quote. But so I feel like identity is a big part of this. And Kurt Vonnegut has a line in his tips for writers, and it's something to the effect of no matter how sweet and innocent your leading characters, make awful things happen to them in order that the reader can see what they're made out of. And I think we all know that instinctively. It's not like I knew that quote going into my career, but this book certainly illustrates that really well because what I do is I give Kristy a concussion and a severe concussion. It's her second concussion. And my research sort of showed that, often it's the second, it's the third concussion that can be, it's not yes, with a lot of concussions, there's a 1 week, 2 week recovery and everything's all good, and then you can return to your normal activities. But for some young people and older people, the damage is, can
Yeah.
be really, really difficult and just uh, a long transition back. So I wanted to give I gave that experience to Christy and sort of took away, pulled the rug out from under her feet. And, her social life, her self-esteem, everything is wrapped into this identity of being a great soccer player, her dreams of the future, everything. So to pull that away, seemed like a really interesting thing to do. And also I saw my daughter kind of go through something similar with that. My wife Lisa played college basketball. Maggie, my daughter, is very athletic and wanted to follow, be like mom, and she played basketball and soccer, is very good at them. And then in sixth grade, had her knee blowout, so she had an ACL surgery, went through the whole rehab. That's, it's a big surgery. It's 6 months rehab. Maybe it should even be longer. Got herself back, tested, go back on the field. Her other knee gave out. Another ACL surgery, same process. Then that surgery was not successful. So that knee gave out again. Three ACL surgeries. And at that point, we were like, Maggie, it's the end of those sports. Like you just can't,
Yeah.
you want to be able to hold your grandchildren in your arms and walk across the road and live a healthy life. So with her, I had to watch that, and I think she's still, years later, still processing that in different ways. And when you're in the thick of things, you don't have time for that kind of reflection that happens later on, or you may not realize what happened. So, and very quickly, Maggie's story is that she had a surgeon said who advised that she check out Crew because she knew that being on a team was something that was important to Maggie, being competitor, being athletic, and that because you're in a boat and the stability of that movement, it was actually strengthening for her knee, not damaging. And she ended up getting recruited into a lot of different colleges and stuff. So she
Worked out.
she had it. Although, there's still a lot of outcomes from the 3S. So seeing that for Maggie gave me the emotional core. They say write about what you know, and I have thoughts about that. We could talk about that one, but certainly write what you feel is a big thing, and write from the heart is a big thing. I've never been a writer who can sit down and write 1,000 words a day and strap myself to the chair and
Yeah.
all of that stuff. It's just not how it comes from me. And if there's anything that's helped me in my career is now that I have been doing this for for 40 years, like I don't beat myself up as much because I've kind of learned my process, and there's quiet time, and that marinating just seems really essential to me.
Yeah.
Everyone's got a different path, but I sort of need to mull things over and really feel something. And until I do, you wonder like, what's my next book going to be about? I have a little bit of an idea now, that, but I think it needs to sit in the back of my mind for a long time.
Yeah. It needs to grow. Well, I can see with you saying that you need to feel that in order to write that, because like I knew after that prologue, I was in the book. And not only was I in the book, but you literally put us in Kristy's head. You get to know what's going on, you get to know how she feels, but you also get to know how she feels about what's going on and how those feelings impact each other. So there's just so much where I really felt like, okay, this must be what it's like. I've never had a concussion, knock wood. Um, but reading it, like I felt so emotionally connected to her because I really felt like I was her. The way that you were writing it and putting those scenes, those moments where she felt like she was watching what was happening around her, not as being a participant, but being detached, because that's just
Yeah.
the way her brain was working now. I'd love for you to talk about that because those sections of the book were just so powerful to get this insight into how this girl whose life is turned upside down, who now feels horribly physically and mentally a lot of the time, is now grappling with what's next. So I'd love for you to say more about how you chose that format for this.
Yeah. Um, yeah, well, some sections of the book kind of break into a kind of a screenplay format. And part of that was purely I thought that would be kind of fun and for a reader and interesting. But then there was also, when I started this, when you start a book, for me, I don't know where it will end. I'm not good at outlines. I feel like that's narrowing at a time when I want to get wide. So I'm always frustrated because editors want outlines of an entire book that's not written. But so I thought I would get more into the concussion and maybe a little more of the medical recovery. But what I ended up doing, and I think it was just not the story demanded it, was that Kristy's struggles with, anxiety and identity and panic attacks and the stresses of falling behind in school and feeling disconnected from her friends and feeling like she's disappointing her parents, even though they didn't really put that on her. Um, all of that kind of lent itself to the sense that she began to distance herself and feel almost a bird's eye view. And I think we've all kind of had glimpses of that in our own lives at times where you're in it, you're in a moment, but there's a part of you that's sitting up in a tree looking down on this thing happening. So in different difficult moments, she sort of that will happen for her and that will break into the screenplay thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a part of me that just thought it would be a fun thing to do, but then I had to really think about why that made sense. It wasn't, that wouldn't be a good enough reason to do it. Like it had to cohere with the story and cohere with her emotional state and everything. So it seemed to, at the end, I'm happy with the way it worked out.
Well, it was really effective for me as a reader because, it happened, um, I would say, early in her recovery, that was happening often to her, and it would happen just in the middle of something that she was dealing with and would happen in the middle of something that was happening in the book. And then as it, as the book went on, as her recovery went on, all of a sudden she realizes, oh, that doesn't really happen to me as much. And it hadn't happened in the book as much. And I thought, clever, clever.
Mm.
I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah. Thank you.
One of the other pieces that I really loved, and you mentioned, there is a certain amount of just concussion awareness, so to speak, of what it is and how it
Mhm.
works. Um, there's also a part of what happens after when the anxiety comes, when the depression might come. And I would say, regardless, concussion or not, readers who have experienced anxiety or depression completely unrelated to that will find a seat at the table here in this book too. But the thing that really got me interested, and I went down this wonderful rabbit hole, and it sounds like you did too in writing the book after reading your author's note, was this idea of art therapy
Mm.
being the thing that could be such a helpful tool, not just for kids, I would say for anybody working with issues like this. So I did. I Googled, I had some fun looking it up. I plan to draw my past, present, and future for sure. So tell me about that piece and how you brought that into the book.
Yeah, a lot of times when I start a book or I have an idea for a book, I soon realize that I'm not smart enough to to write this book, that I need help. So that's where you get into the write what you know. It doesn't mean that you have to know it beforehand, because that would be a very limited way to live. A lot of times it's like learning about things is what opens up, is what makes the writing life a fulfilling and exciting life, is that you can not know about something and dive deep and then tell that story. So, you don't have to write about what you know. And I don't want that to be a limiting thing, but you do have to know what you write about if somehow.
Yes, I love that. I'm writing it down as no.
You get to find out. So I hit on, where I went unexpected was like that I wanted to do therapy. And how it just made sense that she would start to see a therapist. And we know that this is out in the world, that more young people are wide open to therapy in a way that um, 40 years ago, 25 years ago, maybe there was much more of a stigma attached to it. So I think we're seeing young people going to therapy for the first time and successfully. So I kind of started there and started talking to, school social workers and, that kind of thing and family therapists. And I started interviewing some of them. And that's where Kristy starts. So I wanted Kristy's path, to not be like this seamless rise to the top. I wanted it to be winding and meandering with fits and starts a little bit. So she does therapy and meets with a really good therapist and gets a lot of help. But somewhere along the way, and partly the way Christy is maybe a little reticent in some respects, that this therapist thought about art therapy, and that kind of hit into my head. And the truth is, like, I really didn't know what happened in art therapy. I just had this like art therapy. There's something just inherently appealing about it without me really understanding it. So I, of course, took out some books and began reading, and then I found a couple of I asked for references, and I found a couple of art therapists who are really incredibly supportive and incredibly excited, really, to be heard and to be interviewed by me and talk to me, and they read the manuscript. And like just things like I don't know. I guess you think art therapy, they're looking at the picture and analyzing the picture, and it's not really like that. It's not, oh, this picture, oh, you're entering a cave. That means you're afraid of making a big decision here, or whatever that is. A lot of it is just that creative process and that openness that happens. Um, helps the talk therapy and helps your it's not just a talk therapy. There's it engages other parts of the brain and the heart and the mind, and so I think that Kristy, somehow being in art therapy sort of like strikes a chord for her
Yeah.
and helps. But I didn't really know. I just had an idea that it might be cool. It's sort of like, and then as I learned more and more about it, I was like, oh, this is awesome. And I didn't know, I'm not as knowledgeable about children's, all the broad scope of children's literature as some librarians are, other people are. But I was unfamiliar with like, had anyone really, has art therapy been depicted in a middle grade book? I don't know.
I hadn't read one, and I've read a lot.
Yeah,
It
no,
was
I
the
haven't
first
heard of
time for
one. I
me.
haven't had anyone say, "Oh yeah." So,
Yeah.
and I love that. I love her therapist. I love Nellie. I love their scenes together. So, yeah, it was fun. And that's the beauty of writing a story is I really didn't know that it would go there until I just like started living with this girl in my mind and thinking about what would happen, where this could go.
Well, and when readers read it, whether they're familiar with art therapy or not, what I also loved is, the end of your book, they are certainly walking away with this incredible story. They're likely making a lot of personal connections, whether they're literal connections to sports and concussions, but so many figurative, connections of just who are we and are we one thing and can we be other things? But they're also walking away with tools because Kristy learns, a way to breathe to calm herself down. She learns the belly breathing on the mat. She learns that just engaging your mind in kind of a right brain, artistic kind of way allows her the space to think. When you're anxious, when you're depressed, your brain doesn't function all that well. And that art therapy gives you that ability to just be and to calm down. And so I felt like after reading, anyone who's ever experienced some of these feelings has a good set of tools that they could
Right.
use them too.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, and it's always uh, you want that. I want that for the reader, but I didn't, you want it to be a story, a gripping
Right.
story. So the danger when you do a lot of research is the info dump, where we just sort of like, here's the cure, and you don't want to overburden that with the reader and kind of weigh down your story with it becomes a slog. So I wanted to include some of the light at the end of the tunnel, but without having it become like, okay, now here's the easy, handy solution,
Right. Right.
so.
So as I read, and I think you would understand what I'm going to say next, but everybody always has a different interpretation of the book based on what they need to hear in the moment. I always say, books are patient and they find us when we're supposed to find them. Like I truly believe every book has some sort of message for every kind of reader. And I felt I felt two words kept popping up in my mind, like two themes. I am a huge one word theme kind of gal. I choose a new theme, not just for the year. I choose one for every month. I'm that kind of person.
Yeah, all right.
As I was reading it, just two words kept coming up. And one was permission, and the other one was transformation. And
Mm,
what I love that your book did for me, like I'm speaking purely as someone who read it, but I know it'll probably do it for lots of other readers too. I felt like the book was a big giant permission slip beyond the amazing story to just pause and to stop and to be and to acknowledge that we can be more than one thing. And not only is that okay, but we actually can and should say that out loud. Like that was
mm,
just such a huge piece for me is this permission that Kristy finally gave herself, that her body demanded, but she finally gave herself to choose a bigger world, to choose a bigger life that didn't just involve soccer and involved so many other things. And I just truly love seeing her transformation from the beginning of someone who thought this is the worst thing that could ever happen to me and how am I going to recover and my family and my friends and all the things to the end, which I will not give spoilers, but certainly has, a transformation effect on her to where she feels good. I'll just say that at the end of where things are going. And it was an emotional ride, I think, because I'm a mom too. And I thought, oh my gosh, this girl, she's going through so much. It had so many beautiful layers to it. And I
mm.
know readers are going to find the layer that they need and then, maybe find new ones that they didn't quite consider either.
There's a little moment in the book, and there's a lot of thank you about layers. I do think in layers, but there's just a nothing scene in the book where she just sees there's a poster in the school wall about like tryouts for a musical. And I saw that with every athlete. There's just whole huge realms of experiences that are denied to them because they have this singular focus of like, I've got practice, I can't be in a play, I can't learn how to do set design or do that. And suddenly, it kind of strikes her like, oh, this is actually
Yeah.
available to me. And certain friendships are available to her. And I didn't want to, again, I didn't want it to all be perfect for her and every choice to be, the right choice for her. It's important for characters to make mistakes too. Um, we don't like perfect characters. We
Right.
don't, we like people who struggle and have flaws, and
Like us.
that's what life is messy. So, but I liked the idea very much of possibilities opening up to her and her being able to see that. And the question, and I don't think it's a spoiler because I don't think it's that kind of book like the spoiler of, she's really a ghost, like
Right,
no,
right.
this isn't this isn't that. The question is sort of like, will she go back and play soccer or not? And I don't answer that question, but I think that we know that if she does, she's going to go back as a changed person, as a transformed person who is, hopefully has a little more balance in her life and a wider life. And again, that word, just like the world of possibilities. I mean, she's in seventh grade, for crying
Yeah.
out loud.
Yeah.
You see these young people getting really, really narrow at
Yeah.
a time where you're like, hey, what do you mean let's try dancing. Let's pick up an instrument or
Yeah.
whatever is available. And I think we start to see her seeing that and recognizing that, knowing that she's going to have more friends than just the soccer friends.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
I
I
feel
like
like
that.
that's the gift of hindsight, right? You realize you have time. You can pick everything. And you don't remember that or I guess understand it as a kid, especially as both all of my children were in competitive travel sports and it does get very singular and very focused and they don't have a lot of time. And this book was just a reminder that it doesn't have to be
Right.
that way.
Right. And she's not wrong for it to be that way. I
Right.
think she's in particular is a very good soccer player. She really has an opportunity to play college soccer and do all that. But a lot of these kids are just they're not going to be athletes growing up. They're not going to even play sports in college. So it's a shame when it gets so narrow, so young.
Yeah.
But I think there's the social thing becomes such a big part of it. Like I'm on the hockey team, and that becomes like
Yeah.
your
Their
reason for
identity. Yeah.
being, and it's your pass to a lot of so it's your social currency.
Yeah.
So you understand why it happens.
Yeah. I think your book gives all readers permission to just explore all those possibilities of
Hmm.
themselves, young or old.
Good. You sound inspired.
I am.
Well, you're like the best reader. I mean, it's amazing that you've done what you've done, Stephanie, in the sense that like you're just a book lover and it just drives you. It seems like it drives your whole career. It drives this podcast and what you're doing. And I've always have a really, really idealistic, romantic idea of what it is to be a writer. And it's not about chasing the marketplace and figuring out what's hot. And, I think you write the books that are in your heart and you follow, uh, you follow your enthusiasms. When I was young, when I was in college and a little beyond where I was really working on poetry, um, and I had a pen pal who was a published author out of Kansas, Kenneth Irby. He's kind of a minor but significant poet, and we wrote letters. I threw them all away, but I had like 12 to 14 letters back. And what he said to me over and over again was follow your enthusiasms, trust your enthusiasms. And that's how I've tried to conduct my career for the most part is like wherever you're enthusiastic and excited about, go for that. So I see that in you. I see that that's what you do, and I think that is the path, so what I want to see in my own children is like, what do you love? Well, how do we get there? How do we
Right.
make that happen?
Yep. That's
So
what matters. Yeah, that's really what matters. Oh,
I think so.
so you have a few other books that are also new. We've only talked about Shaken, but I'd love for you to mention some of the others that readers might want to take a look at and get their hands on before we close up.
Yeah. Um, Thank you. So I want to just say one more thing about Shaken because there's the boy character in there, Jimbo, who
Yes.
um and I think of him as being like a feral youth from my youth. I had a friend in mind for him, not
Mhm.
exactly that, of course, but I just, it was sort of like that free range child
Yep.
whose parents just give him a little bit more freedom and he's a good kid, but he's out and he sneaks out at night and does things that he's just a wild child. And I think it was sort of like sometimes we look back at the childhoods that used to be like, oh, I'd leave my house at 8 in the morning with my baseball glove and I'd come home at 6 and
Yep.
on my bike and that was it. And a lot of us think back of that freedom and then you look at kids today and they're so scheduled and so I kind of wanted he sort of represents that freedom too. And I think he's an eye-opening character for Kristy. And it's not that they're going to go off and I wanted it to, it's not a romance. It's not that. It's just he represents a kind of a freedom and a way of looking at things that Kristy that was new for her.
Yeah.
So I liked his character and I liked their moments together.
I did too.
Thank you. So yeah, my new books. So one of the things where I say why I love doing school visits and why I can do like in elementary or middle school is that I have books for every age. So I have a new, it's going to be a series actually, and it's called Two Birds and a Moose, and it's an easy to read, a ready to read from Simon and Schuster. So it's a very, very simple story about an aspirational moose. There's a new book coming out called Two Ballerinas and a Moose, and um, he's just this fun little moose character. The books are very simple, very slight. It's funny, I've been at a lot of book festivals and there's hardcovers of this book and there's paperbacks that are, $4.99 or something like that. And I kind of like the paperback better. I just don't feel it's a hardcover book. Like it doesn't feel to me like
Yeah,
it's an
I
easy
know
to
you.
read, consumable, happy story. And some of those get read 40, 50 times, before you're done with them. But
Yes.
it's a very simple story, and I'm thrilled, absolutely thrilled I read it for the first time with pre-K kindergarten. When I do K-6 schools, I always say, they want you to do three presentations or two, and I always come back and say, can I do three and a half? Because I'd like to see the kindergartners, and if you have pre-K, just by
Yeah.
themselves. They're so little cozy. I always sit and we do something 20, 25 minutes because more doesn't work for them. It's
Right.
hard. And I want so then when I see the first graders, like they can do 45 minutes and I can talk on a little bit of a higher level. But I got to read this story with the kindergartners and the pre-K the other day for the first time on
Oh,
a school visit. And it was just so nice to hear them laugh. And
yes.
and so much of that is, they came in prepared to laugh and feeling good. And that has to do with the school and the teachers there that I walk into. But it was fun to share that book for the first time. Um, Paperback, my Blood Mountain has a dog on the cover now, which is smart. Those marketing people are geniuses. And a brother and a sister and a dog are lost in the mountain wilderness. I had three different reviews referenced Hatchet. So I'll take that. It's got some of that feeling of, it's got alternating chapters and um, drama, and it's sort of, yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot. And I was helped by a, a ranger out of Lake Placid who really helped me. Megan McCone helped me with that book and talked to me for hours. And lastly, my Scary Tales series, which there are six books that were published individually, separately in hardcover and then paperback. This is one big compilation that takes three of the books and puts them in one paperback compilation. And I'm thrilled with that for a couple of reasons. It's only $8.99 and it's three books. It's paperback, but it's a 300-page book, even though it's essentially written at a third grade level for the most part. I'm not so conscious of that when I'm writing. I mean, my model for part of it was what we used to call the old high-low
Yep.
in children's books, which is, high interest, low reading ability. So I've had, plenty of sixth and seventh graders have loved Scary Tales because it's a book they can read and they can succeed with. And, I've always felt like that one good book leads to another idea. So
Absolutely.
and because the artwork by Jacopo Bruno is amazing, it has a cool look to it. So a struggling reader would not feel
Yeah.
any stigma at all, especially with this fatter
I was gonna
compilation.
say that big
So
fat book is a
yeah,
sign.
no, it's a total legit
Yeah.
cool book to be walking around with, and and yet it's not that hard to read. At the same time, I meet, second graders, there's just kids who are just love scary and seem impervious to things that would terrify me and others. They just love, so there's that reader will read on level and these books are just great for them. But I wanted, I'm, I love this compilation and I love the price. And that's another thing with school visits is that that feels good to me is I have a lot of paperback books, whereas, I know as a parent, we'll have an author in at the elementary school and it's like, oh, there's a hardcover for $25. And you're like,
Yes.
that's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough. So
Paperback is so much more accessible to readers.
yeah, yeah. So I'm hanging in there. I'm busy. I teach a class for Gotham writers
Mhm.
in so that's two adults writing children's books. So that kind of helps, as you know, Stephanie, you learn a lot by trying to teach and trying to articulate some of the aspects of writing and good storytelling.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to swim and stay afloat and keep this career going, keep writing stories. Yeah.
I think you're successful at that.
Yeah, thank you.
I will put links to all of the books in the show notes for the episode. But where is the best place for listeners to find you online if they want to connect with you or find any of the other books that we didn't get to mention?
Yeah, well, I write a blog. I have a pretty semi-active blog at jamespreller.com. I'm currently doing a series where I've gotten the help or I've enlisted currently about 15, 16 different famous, successful children's book authors and illustrators. And I'm calling it like it's kind of the creativity project, but cultivating creativity. So I see that as my mission as a teacher with aspiring writers is just trying to help turn on that faucet and let people really begin to see the possibilities in their own writing and in children's books where there's such a range where you can really do anything.
Yeah.
And but it's sort of like how? What do you do? And so these writers have written to me with their tips that, my basic question to them was like, what do you do, if anything, to cultivate your creativity, to help stir that up? And some writers are really thoughtful about that and really active. It's not just waiting for the magic to happen.
Right.
A lot of people are pursuing it. And some of them, I hate to say this, Stephanie, are actually waking up early, which seems horrible to me. But I wake up an hour early and I sit down with I fill a page in my notebook or
Yeah.
Yep. So that's the kind of thing that I put out on my blog, and I enjoy that. I'm not a big social media person because I think I would like it, and distraction is sort of my enemy. I
Yeah.
love to be distracted. I love my phone, all of that stuff. So I'm on Facebook, and that's really it. Although some people have been talking me into doing a Substack,
Hmm.
so we'll
Myself
see.
included.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I will put a link to your blog as well, along with all of the books to make it just really easy for people to get their hands on all of your books. But I'm hoping listeners, Shaken is one of the first ones because it's such a powerful read, and I think adults will definitely find their place in it really quickly too. So
Yeah. Well,
I
thank
said
you.
in
And
the
it's not a long book either. It's not
yeah.
yeah, I don't know what is it. It's only like 200 something pages. So I feel like it's a book that you can get through. It might feel I think sometimes I feel like when you're talking about it might feel like a slog where you're like depression and this poor girl with concussion and you get to experience what it's like to have a concussion. But I feel like the pace of the book and the way it moves, it doesn't feel uh
Yeah.
that weighty. And I think maybe if it were a lot longer, it would be too much.
Yeah, it does not feel that way. And I didn't put it down. I read it in a day. Like I ignored dishes and laundry and dogs and, and all
Loved
the things.
ones. Yeah.
Well, I said in the beginning that we always seem to have easy, fun book conversations, and we did it again. So thank you. Thank you so much. This is so fun to have you come back, kicked us off, and now to keep us going. So thank you
Keep
so
us
much.
going. Yeah, well, I like you. I'm proud of you and I'm glad to be a part of this. So thank you. Thank you for supporting me. And if there's anything I can do to help you, I'll do that too.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll find ourselves in the same place. Good luck in the football game tonight.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right.
And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.